One of the things that nanotechnology has done, it has forced people to speak across domains. So you need to first be deeply trained in something, and then while you're getting that training, be reading broadly, attend seminars outside of your exact area so that you can begin to learn the lingo. And you will see you probably have a term for that in your own sciences. So I would say learn broadly, study deeply.
Professor Jim Torr, it's a pleasure to meet you in person.
Nice to meet you. This
followed you for so long.
Met.
Yes, and I followed you for such a long time. You're one of my audience kind of recommendations, and really they've advocated so long to have you on. You are a renowned professor of nanotechnology at Rice University. Been there how many decades or years have you been there?
23 years at Rice, and then I did 11 years at the University of South Carolina. So this is like 33, 34 years.
And we're at a very interesting workshop. We're not going to disclose locations of where we are to protect the innocent, but this has been a very stimulating conference. I would say that this conference has been dedicated to the biggest picture topics in all of science, philosophy, culture, etc. And maybe we'll have more to say about that at another time. But I want to start off. You are a religious scientist. You are an observant religious scientist. I am an observant religious scientist. I'm a practicing religious scientist. Sometimes I make the distinction. We've had on Christian scientists, people that have worked in science who are Christians. We've had many of those. We've had many more atheists, a couple of agnostics, including my first guest, Freeman Dyson, who was what I call a practicing agnostic. I want to start there. As a scientist, do you think it's more economical, say, to approach science from a neutral perspective, not affirming an active intelligence behind the universe at some level, whatever that means? Or is it equally valid to start from a position of maybe a theistic origin of the universe? Can a good scientist be atheist? Can a good scientist be agnostic, a theistic? Or is there a natural starting point whatsoever for a scientist to approach his or her research?
Yeah, I've never really thought about the question, so I'm shooting from the hip, but I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There are good scientists that are in each camp, and there are bad scientists that are in each camp. So a lot depends on your training, where you trained, and your approach to science. So you do not have to be, in my mind. I mean, there's a lot of scientists that I know that are not very religious at all. I've never asked them exactly what they are, but they are great scientists.
Mm-hmm. And we've had a lot of conversations on this particular podcast about alien life. In particular, whether there's specific instances of observed signatures of spacecraft around America, in particular around Southern California where I live. But I want to ask you, is the notion that intelligent aliens have somehow created life, whatever that means, on Earth, in the universe, is that something to be taken seriously? As past guest on the show, Lee Cronin, has postulated, life is ubiquitous, life is uniform, and perhaps alien life is the progenitor of life on Earth. Is that something you take seriously?
Well,
or should be taken seriously?
I think that wherever we look, we've never seen life off of this planet. And if we find life nearby, that we need to really ask, did it come from this planet? You know, a lot of material has exchanged between planets. Certainly we can find things on Earth that are from Mars, things that are on Mars from Earth. So we always have to be concerned with exchange. I don't worry about alien life, serious, not serious. I don't really know. I don't worry about it at all. I don't concern myself with it, and that's probably because of my faith-based side. I'm a firm believer in the Bible, that every word in the Bible is absolutely true. I love the scriptures. I love the Word of God. God created the heavens and the earth. He doesn't go into great detail on how he did that. He doesn't tell us how the molecules came together when he formed a man named Adam and a woman named Eve. We know that she came from some part of Adam's side, but he doesn't give us much details. I don't even know how much allegory is read into that. I just take it for what it is, that God created Adam. And what we do find and there's been writings about this in the Christian community, is that you find more alien activity where there has been greater occult practice. And when prayer comes in and the occult is really dissipated, the occult activity is dissipated, the alien activity seems to go away. So how much of that is what the Bible would call demonic? I don't know. I really don't know these topics well, but I really am not concerned about it because I've read the Bible from the beginning of the book to the end, and I know what the end is going to look like, and so I don't worry about that.
Jim, you gave a really phenomenal talk, and we laid out what is necessary, maybe contingent, just focusing on the micro machine, this exquisite structure that we call the cell. You talked about what are the contingent properties of a cell that would be necessary to, credibly call life, and even beyond that, the different levels of chemistry, of predecessor chemistry that would be necessary, from enzymes to base pairs and RNA, et cetera, et cetera. What's the most complicated? And you gave a wonderful example. You asked, what do you think people have been asked in America, I believe it was, what's the most complicated thing that scientists have made in the lab? Maybe I'm just rephrasing it in some sense. And 30% or so thought a frog had been created in the lab by scientists, which was, and these are college-educated scientists.
80%
people.
Yeah, 80% of the people that were interviewed had some college-level training, either from associate's degree through PhD degree.
Yeah.
And 1/3 of the population believes that scientists have even created things like frogs in the lab. 2/3 believe that scientists have created simple single-celled organisms like bacteria, like a bacterium. And so, yeah, that's what the belief is.
I wanted to put you at ease a little bit. I gave a talk in Italy, in Florence, actually in Galileo's old home, essentially, and I put up a slide back in 2015, and it postulated or demonstrated a survey from the National Science Foundation in America that 25% of Americans believe that the sun orbits around the Earth. So everyone in the audience was cackling, stupid American. I don't know why I used like a Russian accent, but these were Italians. And then I revealed the next slide. 33% of Europeans believe the same thing. What is the most complicated biological, chemical entity, predecessor, precursor, constituent, contingent structure that humans have ever made? Is it Ventnor's, kind of encoding in an existing DNA structure? What's the most complicated thing humans have ever made?
No, I don't think Craig Venter's work on his so-called synthetic cells. I mean, he took an existing cell, he copied a genome from another cell, and he put it in the first cell. I mean, that's a clever experiment, no doubt. That's a clever experiment, but it's certainly not the making of life. Nobody's ever gotten close to life. I mean, a cell is a huge factory. It's a machine. It's just of so much transport, so much processing, and the target of a cell gets harder every year, and that's not because of some evolutionary process. It's because of, we got some background folks here talking, but it's all right. I think they can hear us. Yeah. But the processes that go on in a cell are getting harder every year to think about, because we learned, for example, with chiral induced spin selectivity, that this is how a cell makes things so cleanly. We always thought that it was the hand and glove, the enzyme, and that's the way we taught chemistry for years. And now we're learning that that's just a part of it, and maybe even the minor part. The major part is that these chiral environments, these handedness in environments, are spin valves. So only the electron of a proper spin up or spin down, can go down this path. And because of that, there's very little backscattering. And so the processes don't evolve much heat. And that's why a cell never burns up. We were always wondering about this. How can all that chemistry be taking place in a cell, and the cell doesn't just overheat? And we see this in biological systems. Our brain only puts out at 10 watts when we are full powered thinking about a topic. And then you see the interactomes, the non-covalent interaction, not just the covalent, but the non-covalent. The alignment of molecules is critical for information flow that is transferring through electrostatic potentials at near the speed of light. And the number of combinations of non-covalent interactions that you could have if these things were just randomly associated in a cell is so, there's, in a single yeast cell, just protein-protein interactions is 10 to the 79 billion. As an astronomer, you can think that's a big number.
That's
10 to the 79, yeah, that's a crazy number. And so that's just protein-protein in a simple yeast cell. That's not protein DNA, that's not a carbohydrate with protein, that's just protein-protein. And the way the cell deals with this is it takes the information, that arrangement, and it starts to divide it up between the two sides, and then it clamps down and the cell divides. So you get this progenitor is just keeps passing, you get this information flow from one to the other. And we don't know how to do this. So the complexity of the cell is so hard. Nobody's come close. I showed you a whole list of things that need to be there in the simplest cell. People would always say, oh, the cells are very simple. Well, you take the simplest cell that you can possibly be modeled. It's been modeled. So simple that it can't make any of the amino acids by itself. It has to have all this exogenous input. The simplest of cells has to have so many pieces, and not a single one of them has ever been made by a human being, even with all their advanced techniques, let alone a prebiotically relevant synthesis. So we are so far from this that whatever people have made is absolute child's play compared to what is happening in a cell.
Talk about the arguments on the opposing side. Steelman, for me, the best and maybe most common arguments against an intelligent designer or some process pre-occurring to the formation of life on Earth, perhaps by a large amount of time. What are some of their best arguments, and maybe some are just their most common arguments against an intelligent designer?
Well, I don't normally speak toward an intelligent designer, because as a scientist, I don't have any proof of that directly.
Sure.
Now many people will come with inferences, and I understand, and I'm sympathetic to those. So I don't normally speak about that. As far as the best proof against an intelligent designer from my world, of an organic chemistry world, I don't know that there are any good proofs against an intelligent designer from my world, just looking at it as a synthetic chemist, because we are so far from even being able to think about how molecules would come together to form anything remotely close to life, because molecules don't move toward life. Molecules have only moved toward life when you have a biological entity, an organism, pushing them toward life, propelling them toward life, or a human being trying to organize them towards life. Molecules move away from this. And so even if you consider a liposome, which is a lipid bilayer, people have made lipid bilayers. If you take lipids and you put them in water and you bring them through shear, it's not just shaking, it's through a shearing action, you can get a liposome, which is a lipid bilayer where you have some water on the inside and then water on the outside. Even those are ridiculous. Those have nothing to do with the protocell, because cells aren't like that. As we heard from our friend Tony Futterman today, the inside has to be different from the outside, or else you don't get a proton gradient. So the thing could never work as a cell, as a living cell. The thing could just never work. And you always have the saturated systems on the outside, the unsaturated ones on the inside. How this happens, we don't know. In biology, we know how it happens. There's something called enzymes, flippase enzymes, which flip these things around. So I don't know that there are any good arguments that could dispel an intelligent designer.
But when we hear things, though, we're out under the Tuscan sun, literally, and feeling the warming glow. You think back to 1896 and Lord Kelvin and speculating on the origin of the sun and maybe the age of the sun, and using the best inference from the available data at that time, he concluded the sun is 20 million years old because it's consuming wood or charcoal or some biological, former protobiological substance. But of course that's far, far inadequate. We know the age of the sun is many orders of magnitude greater. We know the age of the universe is greater still. To what extent can you attribute some of the outright hostility, which I view as ad hominem and having no place in science, towards you? But couldn't some of it come from the fact that at some level you're saying we can't do this, we can't do it now? may not be able to do it now, just like we couldn't explain the solar fusion back in 1896, and therefore got a whole host of downstream facts wrong. To what extent are you overemphasizing the man's ability, humankind's ability, if you like, to create plausible origin mechanisms? Why is that relevant? We don't know so much, and we don't even know what we don't know, to use Rumsfeld's lingo, right? So why is man and the human beings in the lab, why are they the standard by which we can say we are failing or inadequate to the task of explaining origin of life?
No, you make a good point. As I've said before in many contexts, I mean, if you asked a man or a woman in the year 1500, will we ever have space flight? Can't imagine we'd have space flight. What is space even to them? And so, they didn't even have flight within our atmosphere. Or would people be ever able to get to the moon? I mean, how can they answer it? It's so foreign to them. And if they had said, I don't know, maybe in 500 years we'd be able to do it, they would have been right at that point. Because the best you could think of is, somebody got up to a very high mountain and jumped and somehow got there. So it's hard to imagine how these things can we can think about this. That's why I never say we will never know. I just say it's very far from today. And the more we learn about the cell, the more the target, the goal, moves away from us much faster than we're moving toward it. That's what tells me that we're nowhere close. I could never just a priori say we're nowhere close. I have to base that on something. And the something is that every year we learn more about the cell that makes it more complex. And so I suspect that we will someday figure out how life was formed. I think we will. And that doesn't negate God for me. I mean, there's a lot of things. Just because we figured out the structure of DNA doesn't lessen God. It makes God all the greater to me. It's like, oh, so that's how you do it. So I think it makes God all the more magnanimous in my mind. I mean, he doesn't change. He's static. I mean, he's always been magnanimous. He just is greater in my own mind. And that's what I love about science. The more I learn about science and particularly about biological systems as a chemist, as I learn about biological systems, I'm like, Lord, you are magnificent.
I made the point today, as someone, I characterize myself as a devout, practicing agnostic, in that I am searching. I am not making stipulations that there is no God. I had a lunch conversation earlier with some people that said, I'm a devout atheist, essentially. And I had this conversation with Freeman Dyson, the very first podcast on the Into the Impossible. I said, Freeman, what are you? And he said, I'm agnostic. And I said, oh, okay. So what church do you go to? And he said, well, I don't go to church. I said, oh, so you mean to tell me, Freeman, with all the love and respect as I have for him, I said, you don't go to the same church that Richard Dawkins doesn't go to. In other words, how could an intelligent alien look down at an agnostic? I find agnosticism to be a great cop-out because people aren't willing to take a side. It means unknowable, but it doesn't mean that you don't have elements of practice. In other words, Freeman, you are functionally indistinguishable from an atheist by your practice. You may believe in the open to the possibility. And I've had conversations with Lawrence Krauss, a prominent atheist, militant, self-declared militant atheist. Do you get the sense that your opponents ever doubt their atheism? Because I assume you doubt your faith on occasion. I doubt faith all the time, but I'm less on the spectrum of religious observance or fidelity, perhaps less than you. Do you doubt your faith? First of all, I shouldn't presume.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, Jim. Yeah.
Absolutely not.
You don't doubt your faith?
Not for a second.
Not the theodicy, not the children gets cancer, dies at age 5 years old at the peak of his or her cuteness.
No, there's a ton that I can't understand, that I don't understand. But I love the Lord Jesus Christ with all my heart. I love him so much. And, I had an experience with the Lord when I came to know him at the age of 18. And where his presence filled the room, right there in my room. I never had an experience before that like it. I never had an experience like that. And that was so rich. And I just don't doubt him. I just don't doubt him.
Visceral experience.
Yeah, it's just part of me. No, so I don't.
I was talking to a very eminent lawyer in California recently, And I said, there's all these notions of well, this and that is just circumstantial evidence. And he said, well, actually, circumstantial evidence in a court of law is actually very highly, reliable. For me, I do doubt, and I find there is doubt. I also find there's no doubt on the militant atheist side. They are never questioned by the birth of a child, by the opening of a flower, by the wings of a hummingbird, by the biological mysteries of the cell. And that I find that that's non-scientific. I'm not accusing you of an eminent scientist, but to never doubt or not to believe that there could be a falsification of a hypothesis. Again, I don't put Popper on a pedestal, but is there any combination of evidence or direct evidence other than personal revelation that can bring one to a specific, instantiation of God? We had this conversation at the end of the session earlier today. Is God benevolent? Can you go from intelligent design to benevolent design? Could there be malevolent design? I find those conversations fascinating because I also think they may be unanswerable because not everyone has had the personal revelation that you attest to and that you're a witness to. I certainly haven't. I should point out we're both biologically born Jewish. We both had interesting paths to our practice and our faith. But I have always wondered, is there an argument from scientific design that would lead to a specific instantiation of a theology? Do you find, is that possible? Could you essentially have the same faith, but from a scientific point of view, in the virtue and reality of Jesus Christ to you?
This is a hard question for me. It's hard because I don't normally think in these contexts. I don't speak often to philosophers. And not that you're a philosopher, but you're speaking philosophically. Mm-hmm. So I've really not thought much about this. I guess I'm a lot simpler in my faith and in my understanding than many other people. I love the scriptures. I love the word of God. It means so much to me. I love the Lord. And I enjoy my science. Mm-hmm. I know that God is good. I know that he is kind. I know that he is gracious. I know that man is rebellious. I see it in my own heart. I see how wayward I am, how fickle I can be. I see how at 1 minute I use my tongue to praise God and the next second I'm cursing man. And I see what's there. So if there's anything good, anything righteous, anything holy, it's all because of the grace of God. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything wicked, it's all because of the wickedness of man. And so for me, it's in a way, it's a simpler question, and I don't even ask it that much. So it's hard for me to answer you because I haven't really pondered these things.
We'll get back to science in just a bit because, I can't resist with such an eminent scientist to just talk shop and understand what really excites you about nanotechnology, nanomachines, chemistry of the cell, et cetera. But before we move off of the philosophical bent that you mentioned, and I should say, physicist, the early word for physicist was natural philosopher, right? So Galileo spoke about natural philosophers in derisive terms, but he was a natural philosopher. I can't resist it. So one thing that I'm curious about, and I asked this of Stephen Meyer when he was on this podcast a year and a half ago for his book, A Return to the God Hypothesis. He said, at what level does God intervene in your estimation? Is it at the level of, there's a cell germination or a sperm and an egg or DNA or a cell or DNA or RNA or the fine structure constant or the gravitational potential or the inflationary perturbation spectrum? At what level and how? Because the key revelation that I've had from talking to militant atheists and other atheists like Sean Carroll, who calls himself a poetic naturalist, who's been on this show, is that there's no term in the standard model Lagrangian that is even has an exchange interaction with anything that is necessary to explain the properties of, say, particle physics, just restricting ourselves to something simple like Lagrangian of the standard model. Where does God intervene? How early does God intervene? Because as I said, I think it's a problem. If I tell my kids, that rainbow over there is so beautiful, and they say, Daddy, how did it get there? That's how God made it. I think that short circuits their ability to become good scientists themselves, not that I force them. But so at what level and how can a God entity, a theological entity, or maybe just an intelligent designer, what element can he intervene with nature and how?
Right. So I would say that that fundamentally I'm a progressive creationist, meaning that God didn't just set the whole thing off and then it ran by itself, that there were specific acts of creation where he set this thing in motion. He called the molecules together, however he does that, through self-assembly, and gets it into this very, very stable, high-energy state, as we learned about this morning. And so I don't know the details. I know what the scriptures say, that everything has been created by him. Everything. And the details of this, I don't know. This is what he gives us the ability to investigate and to look at. And some of these things we learn, that this then modifies, and now we have a new structure based on this. I don't understand it all the places. It could be as fundamental as the electrons moving around these protons in the nucleus. Does this happen all by itself? Is there something where he is there at that level? I don't know. I don't know enough about an atom to know really what's happening here. But there's no doubt that he sets these things up, and they seem now to run autocatalytically. They seem to run by themselves. But I don't know what happens if he lifts his hand from all this for an instant. If the whole thing just spins out of control. I don't know. Maybe as a physicist, you know better. And you say, no, these things are very controlled. There's no problem. You have this force, you have that force, and these things are well defined. I take these things and I use these to my advantage all the time because I know exactly how these molecules are going to respond. And they do it the same way every time. Mm-hmm. And so when I pray, God, bless my reactions, bless my work, I'm not saying just bless it for me.
Sustain.
Not somebody else, because if it's not reproducible, then I'm in big trouble. Mm-hmm. But it's more of a, Lord, guide me in the right mm-hmm. way. Guide me in the way of truth, because the Bible says that the darkness and the light are the same to him. So he sees in the darkness, and I don't. He sees things that I don't see, and I'm saying, Lord, enlighten me so that I can see this thing too. You're asking me a very deep question, and I'm not sure I'm giving you the answer that you deserve. No, but I'm trying.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I think the earnest approach that you have is refreshing, Jim. I think there's too much kind of anodyne, dissociation of the soul of a scientist, because we are human beings. If not, good luck to artificial intelligence, and just go on and let me know the answer at the end. We are human beings. Einstein said the greatest joy he ever had was the visualization that a person in free fall would experience no gravitational forces. Tell me, how can an AI, how can something dispassionate, how can they even comprehend what free fall is, let alone what joy is? So I think to dissociate the soul from the scientist is a grave error of our time, and it's unique to our time. Harvard was started as an institution to teach theology, divinity, teaching. You couldn't graduate without knowing Hebrew. And there's so many paths we could go down here. I guess I can't resist but to ask you about and I have to say, you asked me, how does God do it? Or you asked yourself, how does God do it if he keeps sustaining it? What is it like from his perspective? Dark and light are the same. It's meaningless to us. It doesn't mean it's meaningless ultimately, but it reminds me of a joke that one of my kids told me. He said, Dad, did you ever hear about the story where the kid asked God, God, what is a million years like to you? And God says, it's like a second to you, my son. And then the kid said, wow, God, what's $1 million like to you? And God says to the boy, it's like a penny to you. And the boy thinks for a second and says, God, can I borrow a penny? And God says, yes, in a second. We can't comprehend these things. Yeah. But to not confront these things, as most people, especially my Jewish friends like Lawrence Krauss, I debated this on my podcast with him. I said, Lawrence, when was the last time you thought seriously about God, studied the Torah, the Old Testament? He's a Jew. Lapsed. He had a bar mitzvah, which I didn't. He said, when I was bar mitzvah. So I said, Lawrence, let me ask you a question. If some kid who's 12, 13 years old comes up to you, some little pisha, as we would say, and says, Lawrence, your theory of the universe from nothing is total, nonsense. It's inadequate. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't sound right to me. You would say, what do you know? You're 13 years old. And yet, you, Lawrence, you are refuting and rejecting a tradition that you last studied at age 12. So what do you know? And it was clear, it was kind of shaking, but he couldn't, I'll never convert him. That's not my job, is to bring him back to do teshuva. Jim, I have a little gift for you. This is a fragment of the Earth's moon, which was brought here via gravity and eventually the U.S. Postal Service to me. It's 0.251 grams. If I told you that somewhere deep inside of this moon meteorite, which is your gift for coming on the Into the Impossible podcast, if deep inside of there, and I'd love it if you look for it in your laboratory, there's DNA. What would that say to you? What would that mean to you? Thank you very much, by the way.
That would probably tell me that something went from the Earth to the moon and then the moon back.
And what about the reverse hypothesis? I've had this debate with Sean Carroll. Yeah. The non-observation of life on the moon and the non-observation of life on Mars, yes, we haven't searched everywhere, and evidence, absence of evidence is enough. But doesn't it not have to have some Bayesian prior reduction? I mean, doesn't it tell us something that we haven't seen a megacity on Mars? I mean, it might not tell us very much, but it tells us something, does it not? That life is ubiquitous, the exchange of material from Earth to the Mars and Mars to the Earth and the moon to the Earth, etc., for billions of years. Does that not give us something to say about the efficiency of so-called panspermic origin of life on Earth?
Sure, I'm fine. I'm fine with life coming from somewhere else. What I'm talking about is origin of first life.
Yes.
And so even if some advanced creatures came and seeded it here and it took off, I mean, I'd say, okay, where'd those creatures come from? That's what I'm dealing with. This is very nice of you. Thank you. So this is
lunar regolith.
Okay.
Not brought by the astronauts, brought by eBay. So we have a new session starting in a little bit. I want to ask you, first of all, what's the most exciting aspect of your research? What jazzes you up every day to do the work that you do as a distinguished professor at Rice University? What is that to you?
I have 4 children. You might as well ask me, which one do I love the most? I mean, it's
the top 10 things.
It's whatever is in front of me at that moment. I mean, we're using flash joule heating to make graphene from trash. I mean, this is really interesting. We take municipal trash, boom, and no solvents, no water, boom, the whole thing turns into graphene that you can put into concrete and building material, and then we're using it to volatilize metals out of electronic waste, which is the fastest growing waste in the world. We're using it to remediate soil. So this is a very exciting thing. Our little nano machines that are drilling into cells to kill them, killing superbacteria, killing MRSA, and all these deadly bacteria that are killing hundreds of thousands of people every year. So this is really exciting to me to be able to work on projects like this, and so we work from medicine to materials to interesting ways of synthesis, and I love it all. I'm like a kid in the candy store.
We have a lot of young listeners that are maybe considering graduate school, maybe beginning graduate school. What advice do you have for a student who's fascinated by these nanomachines, this technology that you are pioneering and have done such an eminent work in? What advice do you give to such a young student?
Well, they say the people that have the biggest effect across the sciences are people that are T people, like the letter T. The people that are highly trained in some discipline. That's why I don't think you should get a degree in something as nebulous as nanotechnology. It's too broad. You need something in chemistry or physics or biology, something that goes very deep, and then be able to speak across many different disciplines, be able to cover many disciplines so that you're reading broadly. So, I have a company that makes electronic memory. I have companies that work on these nanomachines, others that are straight drug companies, others that are straight materials companies. And I've learned to speak across many domains, and that's one of the things that nanotechnology has done. It has forced people to speak across domains. So you need to first be deeply trained in something, and then while you're getting that training, be reading broadly, attend seminars outside of your exact area so that you can begin to learn the lingo. And you will see you probably have a term for that in your own sciences. So, for example, when I started working with physicists, they would talk about a polaron. What is a polaron? What's a polaron? Well, we have a term in chemistry called a radical cation. Oh, I know what a radical cation is. And we're talking about the same thing. It's just a different terminology. and the way they view things. I talk about electrostatic potential. Physicist talks about a virtual photon. I'm like, what's a virtual? I know what a photon is. What's a virtual photon? Well, this is the same thing where I have an electrostatic potential. They start pushing two electrons together. They want to repel. And so it's terminology, and they view things a little bit differently than we do. And I learn from that. So I would say learn broadly, study deeply.
Study deeply. Phenomenal. In the remaining couple of minutes, I usually ask 4 existential questions. We only have time for one. This one has to do with what Richard Feynman called the cataclysm question. I should point out, of course, that Richard Feynman is famous for an essay called There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom, which is one of the pioneering aspects of nanotechnology from the 50s or 60s. He said that what if the Earth is faced with a cataclysm, an Armageddon of sorts, and we want to encode or encrypt the most information in the smallest amount of sentences to describe it, such that, and this is my take now, we can put it on a time capsule and send it off into space to give a little brag, a little swagger about what human beings, the glory of the human creation. What would that be for you? He said the atomic hypothesis. You can't say that. What would encapsulate the most information that human beings in their greatest glory could brag about with a little bit of swagger for all eternity, in your estimation?
I would say the scriptures. I would say the Bible. I mean,
nothing scientific.
You take that and you send it out, because that's what certainly humanity is going to need if it's ever going to start over again. Okay.
Jim Tour, Distinguished Professor of Nanotechnology of Chemistry at Rice University. It's such a pleasure. I do want to do a part 2. We only barely scratched the surface, maybe our time here or by Zoom in the near future, Jim. This is a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
If you're enjoying this series, give us a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, and that way you'll hear when we're coming out with new videos. There are no salaried employees in this organization. All the accounting, all the legal work, that's all done by friends of mine. The only thing that I have to pay for is the production work, and if you could help us out with that, I'd appreciate it. There's a link below where you can just click on that and help us in several different ways. Thank you.